Section 3 of the Commission in Lunacy by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Clara Bell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Peary. Next evening at 9, Bianchon mounted his uncle's dusty staircase and found him at work on the statement of some complicated judgment. The coat Lavienne had ordered of the tailor had not been sent, so Popinot put on his old stained coat, and was the Popinot unadorned whose appearance made those laugh who did not know the secrets of his private life. Bianchon, however, obtained permission to pull his cravat straight and to button his coat, and he hid the stains by crossing the breast of it with the right side over the left, and so displaying the new front of the cloth. But in a minute the judge rucked the coat up over his chest by the way in which he stuffed his hands into his pockets, obeying an irresistible habit. Thus the coat, deeply wrinkled both in front and behind, made a sort of hump in the middle of the back, leaving a gap between the waistcoat and trousers through which his shirt showed. Bianchon, to his sorrow, only discovered this crowning absurdity at the moment when his uncle entered the Marquis's room. A brief sketch of the person and the career of the lady in whose presence the doctor and the judge now found themselves is necessary for an understanding of her interview with Popinot. Madame d'Espard had, for the last 7 years, been very much the fashion in Paris, where fashion can raise and drop by turns various personages who, now great and now small, that is to say, in view or forgotten, are at last quite intolerable, as discarded ministers are, and every kind of decayed sovereignty. These flatterers of the past, odious with their stale pretensions, know everything, speak ill of everything, and, like ruined profligates, are friends with all the world. Since her husband had separated from her in 1815, Madame d'Espard must have married in the beginning of 1812. Her children, therefore, were aged respectively 15 and 13. By what luck was the mother of a family, about 33 years of age, still the fashion? Though fashion is capricious, and no one can foresee who shall be her favourites, though she often exalts a banker's wife, or some woman of very doubtful elegance and beauty, it certainly seems supernatural when fashion puts on constitutional airs and gives promotion for age. But in this case fashion had done as the world did, and accepted Madame d'Espard as still young. The Marquise, who was 33 by her register of birth, was 22 in a drawing-room in the evening. But by what care, what artifice! Elaborate curls shaded her temples. She condemned herself to live in twilight, affecting illness so as to sit under the protecting tones of light filtered through muslin. Like Diane de Poitiers, she used cold water in her bath, and, like her again, the Marquise slept on a horsehair mattress with morocco-covered pillows to preserve her hair. She ate very little, only drank water, and observed monastic regularity in the smallest actions of her life. This severe system has, it is said, been carried so far as to the use of ice instead of water, and nothing but cold food, by a famous Polish lady of our day who spends a life, now verging on a century old, after the fashion of a town belle. Fated to live as long as Marion de Lorme, whom history has credited with surviving to be 130, the old vice-queen of Poland, at the age of nearly 100, has the heart and brain of youth, a charming face, an elegant shape, and in her conversation, sparkling with in the fire, she can compare the men and books of our literature with the men and books of the 18th century. Living in Warsaw, she orders her caps of Herbaut in Paris. She is a great lady with the amiability of a mere girl. She swims, she runs like a schoolboy, and can sink onto a sofa with the grace of a young coquette. She mocks at death and laughs at life. After having astonished the Emperor Alexander, she can still amaze the Emperor Nicholas by the splendor of her entertainments. She can still bring tears to the eyes of a youthful lover, for her age is whatever she pleases, and she has the exquisite self-devotion of a grisette. In short, she is herself a fairy tale, unless indeed she is a fairy. Had Madame d'Espard known Madame Zéronsac? Did she mean to imitate her career? Be that as it may, the Marquise proved the merits of the treatment. Her complexion was clear, her brow unwrinkled, her figure, like that of Henri II's lady-love, preserved the litheness, the freshness, the covered charms which bring a woman love and keep it alive. The simple precautions of this course, suggested by art and nature and perhaps by experience, had met in her with a general system which confirmed the results. The Marquise was absolutely indifferent to everything that was not herself. Men amused her, but no man had ever caused her those deep agitations which stir both natures to their depths, and wreak one on the other. She knew neither hatred nor love. When she was offended, she avenged herself coldly, quietly, at her leisure, waiting for the opportunity to gratify the ill will she cherished against anybody who dwelt in her unfavorable remembrance. She made no fuss, she did not excite herself, she talked because she knew that by 2 words a woman may cause the death of 3 men. She had parted from Monsieur d'Espard with the greatest satisfaction. Had he not taken with him 2 children who at present were troublesome, and in the future would stand in the way of her pretensions? Her most intimate friends, as much as her least persistent admirers, seeing about her none of Cornelia's jewels who come and go and unconsciously betray their mother's age, took her for quite a young woman. The 2 boys, about whom she seemed so anxious in her petition, were, like their father, as unknown in the world as the Northwest Passage is unknown to navigators. Monsieur d'Espard was supposed to be an eccentric personage who had deserted his wife without having the smallest cause for complaint against her. Mistress of herself at 22, and mistress of her fortune of 26,000 francs a year, the Marquise hesitated long before deciding on a course of action and ordering her life. Though she benefited by the expenses her husband had incurred in his house, though she had all the furniture, the carriages, the horses, in short, all the details of a handsome establishment, she lived a retired life during the years 1816, 17, and 18, a time when families were recovering from the disasters resulting from political tempests. She belonged to one of the most important and illustrious families of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and her parents advised her to live with them as much as possible after the separation forced upon her by her husband's inexplicable caprice. In 1820, the Marquise roused herself from her lethargy. She went to court, appeared at parties, and entertained in her own house. From 1821 to 1827 she lived in great style, and made herself remarked for her taste and her dress. She had a day, an hour, for receiving visits, and ere long she had seated herself on the throne occupied before her by Madame la Vicomtesse de Beauséant, the Duchesse de Langeais, and Madame Firmiani, who, on her marriage with Monsieur de Camp, had resigned the sceptre in favour of the Duchesse de Maufrigneuse, from whom Madame d'Espard snatched it. The world knew nothing beyond this of the private life of the Marquise d'Espard. She seemed likely to shine for long on the Parisian horizon, like the sun, near its setting, but which will never set. The Marquise was on terms of great intimacy with a duchess as famous for her beauty as for her attachment to a prince just now in banishment, but accustomed to play a leading part in every prospective government. Madame d'Espard was also a friend of a foreign lady, with whom a famous and very wily Russian diplomat was in the habit of discussing public affairs, and then an antiquated countess, who was accustomed to shuffle the cards for the great game of politics, had adopted her in a maternal fashion. Thus, to any man of high ambitions, Madame d'Espard was preparing a covert but very real influence to follow the public and frivolous ascendancy she now owed to fashion. Her drawing-room was acquiring political individuality. What do they say at Madame d'Espard's? Are they against the measure in Madame d'Espard's drawing-room? Were questions repeated by a sufficient number of simpletons to give the flock of the faithful who surrounded her the importance of a coterie. A few damaged politicians whose wounds she had bound up, and whom she flattered, pronounced her as capable in diplomacy as the wife of the Russian ambassador to London. The Marquise had indeed several times suggested to deputies or to peers words and ideas that had rung through Europe. She had often judged correctly of certain events on which her circle of friends dared not express an opinion. The principal persons about the court came in the evening to play whist in her rooms. Then she also had the qualities of her defects. She was thought to be, and she was, indiscreet. Her friendship seemed to be staunch. She worked for her protégés with a persistency which showed that she cared less for patronage than for increased influence. This conduct was based on her dominant passion, vanity. Conquests and pleasure, which so many women love, to her seemed only means to an end. She aimed at living on every point of the largest circle that life can describe. Among the men still young, and to whom the future belonged, who crowded her drawing-room on great occasions, were to be seen Messieurs de Marsay and de Ronquerolles, de Montriveau, de la Roche-Hugon, de Sérisy, Ferraud, Maxime de Troyes, de Listomere, the two Vandenesses, du Châtelet, and others. She would frequently receive a man whose wife she would not admit, and her power was great enough to induce certain ambitious men to submit to these hard conditions, such as two famous royalist bankers, M. de Nucingen and Ferdinand du Tillet. She had so thoroughly studied the strength and the weakness of Paris life that her conduct had never given any man the smallest advantage over her. An enormous price might have been set on a note or letter by which she might have compromised herself without one being produced. If an arid soul enabled her to play her part to the life, her person was no less available for it. She had a youthful figure. Her voice was, at will, soft and fresh, or clear and hard. She possessed in the highest degree the secret of that aristocratic pose by which a woman wipes out the past. The Marquise knew well the art of setting an immense space between herself and the sort of man who fancies he may be familiar after some chance advances. Her imposing gaze could deny everything. In her conversation, fine and beautiful sentiments and noble resolutions flowed naturally, as it seemed, from a pure heart and soul, but in reality she was all self. and quite capable of blasting a man who was clumsy in his negotiations, at the very time when she was shamelessly making a compromise for the benefit of her own interest. Rastignac, in trying to fasten on to this woman, had discerned her to be the cleverest of tools, but he had not yet used it. Far from handling it, he was already finding himself crushed by it. This young condottiere of the brain, condemned like Napoleon to give battle constantly, while knowing that a single defeat would prove the grave of his fortunes, had met a dangerous adversary in his protectress. For the first time in his turbulent life, he was playing a game with a partner worthy of him. He saw a place as minister in the conquest of Madame d'Espard, so he was her tool till he could make her his, a perilous beginning. The Hôtel d'Espard needed a large household, and the Marquise had a great number of servants. The grand receptions were held in the ground-floor rooms, but she lived on the first floor of the house. The perfect order of a fine staircase, splendidly decorated, and rooms fitted in the dignified style which formerly prevailed at Versailles, spoke of an immense fortune. When the judge saw the carriage gates thrown open to admit his nephew's cab, he took in with a rapid glance the lodge, the porter, the courtyard, the stables, the arrangement of the house, the flowers that decorated the stairs, the perfect cleanliness of the banisters, walls, and carpets, and counted the footmen in livery, who, as the bell rang, appeared on the landing. His eyes, which only yesterday in his parlour had sounded the dignity of misery under the muddy clothing of the poor, now studied with the same penetrating vision the furniture and splendour of the rooms he passed through, to pierce the misery of grandeur. Monsieur Popinot, Monsieur Bianchon. The two names were pronounced at the door of the boudoir where the Marquise was sitting, a pretty room recently refurnished and looking out on the garden behind the house. At the moment Madame d'Espard was seated in one of the old rococo armchairs of which Madame had set the fashion. Rastignac was at her left hand, on a low chair, in which he looked settled like an Italian lady's cousin. A third person was standing by the corner of the chimney-piece. As the shrewd doctor had suspected, the Marquise was a woman of a parched and wiry constitution. But for her regimen, her complexion must have taken the ruddy tone that is produced by constant heat. But she added to the effect of her acquired pallor by the strong colours of the stuffs she hung her rooms with, or in which she dressed. Reddish-brown, marron, bistre with a golden light in it, suited her to perfection. Her boudoir, copied from that of a famous lady then at the height of fashion in London, was in tan-coloured velvet, but she had added various details of ornament which moderated the pompous splendour of this royal hue. Her hair was dressed like a girl's, in bands ending in curls, which emphasized the rather long oval of her face, but an oval face is as majestic as a round one is ignoble. The mirrors, cut with facets to lengthen or flatten the face at will, amply proved the rule as applied to the physiognomy. On seeing Popinot, who stood in the doorway craning his neck like a startled animal, with his left hand in his pocket and the right hand holding a hat with a greasy lining, the Marquise gave Rastignac a look wherein lay a germ of mockery. The good man's rather foolish appearance was so completely in harmony with his grotesque figure and scared looks, that Rastignac, catching sight of Bianchon's dejected expression of humiliation through his uncle, could not help laughing, and turned away. The Marquise bowed a greeting, and made a great effort to rise from her seat, falling back again, not without grace, with an air of apologizing for her incivility by affected weakness. At this instant the person who was standing between the fireplace and the door bowed slightly, and pushed forward 2 chairs, which he offered by a gesture to the doctor and the judge. Then, when they had seated themselves, he leaned against the wall again, crossing his arms. A word as to this man. There is living now in our day a painter, Decamps, who possesses in the very highest degree the art of commanding your interest in everything he sets before your eyes, whether it be a stone or a man. In this respect his pencil is more skilful than his brush. He will sketch an empty room and leave a broom against the wall. If he chooses, you shall shudder. You shall believe that this broom has just been the instrument of crime, and is dripping with blood. It shall be the broom which the widow Bancal used to clean out the room where Fualdès was murdered. Yes, the painter will touzle that broom like a man in a rage. He will make each hair of it stand on end as though it were on your own bristling scalp. He will make it the interpreter between the secret poem of his imagination and the poem that shall have its birth in yours. After terrifying you by the aspect of that broom, tomorrow he will draw another, and lying by it, a cat, asleep but mysterious in its sleep, shall tell you that this broom is that on which the wife of a German cobbler rides off to the Sabbath on the Brocken. Or it will be a quite harmless broom, on which he will hang the coat of a clerk in the treasury. Decamps had in his brush what Paganini had in his bow, a magnetically communicative power. Well, I should have to transfer to my style that striking genius, that marvelous knack of the pencil, to depict the upright, tall, lean man dressed in black, with black hair, who stood there without speaking a word. This gentleman had a face like a knife-blade, cold and harsh, with a colour like Seine water when it was muddy and strewn with fragments of charcoal from a sunken barge. He looked at the floor, listening and passing judgment. His attitude was terrifying. He stood there like the dreadful broom to which Decamps has given the power of revealing a crime. Now and then, in the course of conversation, the Marquise tried to get some tacit advice, but however eager her questioning, he was as grave and as rigid as the statue of the Commendatore. The worthy Popinot, sitting on the edge of his chair in front of the fire, his hat between his knees, stared at the gilt chandeliers, the clock, and the curiosities with which the chimney-shelf was covered, the velvet and trimmings of the curtains, and all the costly and elegant nothings that a woman of fashion collects about her. He was roused from his homely meditations by Madame d'Espard, who addressed him in a piping tone. "Monsieur, I owe you 1,000,000 thanks." "1,000,000 thanks?" thought he to himself. "That is too many. It does not mean one." "For the trouble you condescend." "Condescend," thought he. "She is laughing at me." "To take in coming to see an unhappy client, who is too ill to go out." Here the lawyer cut the Marquise short by giving her an inquisitorial look, examining the sanitary condition of the unhappy client. "As sound as a bell," said he to himself. "Madame," said he, assuming a respectful mien, "you owe me nothing. Although my visit to you is not in strict accordance with the practice of the court, we ought to spare no pains to discover the truth in cases of this kind. Our judgment is then guided less by the letter of the law than by the promptings of our conscience. Whether I seek the truth here or in my own consulting room, so long as I find it, all will be well." While Popinot was speaking, Rastignac was shaking hands with Bianchon. The Marquise welcomed the doctor with a little bow full of gracious significance. "Who is that?" asked Bianchon in a whisper of Rastignac, indicating the dark man. "The Chevalier d'Espard, the Marquis's brother." "Your nephew told me," said the Marquise to Popinot, "how much you are occupied, and I know, too, that you are so good as to wish to conceal your kind actions, so as to release those whom you oblige from the burden of gratitude. The work in court is most fatiguing, it would seem. Why have they not twice as many judges?" "Ah, madame, that would not be difficult. We should be none the worse if they had. But when that happens, fowls will cut their teeth." As he heard this speech, so entirely in character with the lawyer's appearance, the Chevalier measured him from head to foot, out of one eye, as much as to say, "We shall easily manage him." The Marquise looked at Rastignac, who bent over her. "That is the sort of man," murmured the dandy in her ear, "who is trusted to pass judgments on the life and interests of private individuals." Like most men who have grown old in a business, Popinot readily let himself follow the habits he had acquired, more particularly habits of mind. His conversation was all of the shop. He was fond of questioning those he talked to, forcing them to unexpected conclusions, making them tell more than they wished to reveal. Pozzo di Borgo, it is said, used to amuse himself by discovering other folks' secrets and entangling them in his diplomatic snares, and thus, by invincible habit, showed how his mind was soaked in wiliness. As soon as Popinot had surveyed the ground, so to speak, on which he stood, he saw that it would be necessary to have recourse to the cleverest subtleties, the most elaborately wrapped up and disguised, which were in use in the courts, to detect the truth. Bianchon sat cold and stern, as a man who has made up his mind to endure torture without revealing his sufferings. But in his heart he wished that his uncle could only trample on this woman as we trample on a viper, a comparison suggested to him by the Marquise's long dress, by the curve of her attitude, her long neck, small head, and undulating movements. "Well, monsieur," said Madame d'Espard, "however great my dislike to be or seem selfish, I have been suffering too long not to wish that you may settle matters at once. Shall I soon get a favorable decision?" "Madame, I will do my best to bring matters to a conclusion," said Popinot, with an air of frank good nature. "Are you ignorant of the reason which made the separation necessary which now subsists between you and the Marquis d'Espard?" "Yes, monsieur," she replied, evidently prepared with a story to tell. "At the beginning of 1816, Monsieur d'Espard, whose temper had completely changed within 3 months or so, proposed that we should go to live on one of his estates near Briançon, without any regard for my health, which that climate would have destroyed, or for my habits of life. I refused to go. My refusal gave rise to such unjustifiable reproaches on his part that from that hour I had my suspicions as to the soundness of his mind. On the following day he left me, leaving me his house and the free use of my own income, and he went to live in the Rue de la Montagne Sainte-Geneviève, taking with him my 2 children." "One moment, madame," said the lawyer, interrupting her. "What was that income?" 26,000 francs a year," she replied parenthetically. "I at once consulted old Monsieur Bourdin as to what I ought to do," she went on, "but it seems that there are so many difficulties in the way of depriving a father of the care of his children that I was forced to resign myself to remaining alone at the age of 22, an age at which many young women do very foolish things. You have read my petition, no doubt, monsieur. You know the principal facts on which I rely to procure a commission in lunacy with regard to Monsieur d'Espard." "Have you ever applied to him, madame, to obtain the care of your children?" "Yes, monsieur, but in vain. It is very hard on a mother to be deprived of the affection of her children, particularly when they can give her such happiness as every woman clings to." "The elder must be 16, said Popinot. 15, said the Marquise eagerly. Here Bianchon and Rastignac looked at each other. Madame d'Espard bit her lips. "What can the age of my children matter to you?" "Well, madame," said the lawyer, without seeming to attach any importance to his words, "a lad of 15 and his brother of 13, I suppose, have legs and their wits about them. They might come to see you on the sly. If they do not, it is because they obey their father, and to obey him in that matter, they must love him very dearly." "I do not understand," said the Marquise. "You do not know, perhaps," replied Popinot, "that in your petition your attorney represents your children as being very unhappy with their father." Madame d'Espard replied with charming innocence, "I do not know what my attorney may have put into my mouth." "Forgive my inferences," said Popinot, "but justice weighs everything. What I ask you, madame, is suggested by my wish thoroughly to understand the matter. By your account, Monsieur d'Espard deserted you on the most frivolous pretext. Instead of going to Briançon, where he wished to take you, he remained in Paris. This point is not clear. Did he know this Madame Jean Renaud before his marriage?" "No, monsieur," replied the Marquise, with some asperity, visible only to Rastignac and the Chevalier d'Espard. She was offended at being cross-examined by this lawyer, when she had intended to beguile his judgment. But as Popinot still looked stupid from sheer absence of mind, she ended by attributing his interrogatory to the questioning spirit of Voltaire's bailiff. "My parents," she went on, "married me at the age of 16 to Monsieur d'Espard, whose name, fortune, and mode of life were such as my family looked for in the man who was to be my husband. Monsieur d'Espard was then 26. He was a gentleman in the English sense of the word. His manners pleased me. He seemed to have plenty of ambition, and I like ambitious people," she added, looking at Rastignac. "If Monsieur d'Espard had never met that Madame Jean Renaud, his character, his learning, his acquirements would have raised him, as his friends then believed, to high office in the government. King Charles X, at that time, monsieur, had the greatest esteem for him, and a peer's seat, an appointment at court, some important post certainly would have been his. That woman turned his head, and has ruined all the prospects of my family." "What were Monsieur d'Espard's religious opinions at that time?" He was and is still a very pious man. You do not suppose that Madame Jean Renaud may have influenced him by mysticism? No, monsieur. You have a very fine house, madame, said Popinot suddenly, taking his hands out of his pockets and trying to pick up his coat-tails and warm himself. This boudoir is very nice. Those chairs are magnificent. The whole apartment is sumptuous. You must indeed be most unhappy when seeing yourself here. You know that your children are ill-lodged, ill-clothed, and ill-fed. I can imagine nothing more terrible for a mother. Yes, indeed. I should be so glad to give the poor little fellows some amusement, while their father keeps them at work from morning till night at that wretched history of China. You give handsome balls. They would enjoy them, but they might acquire a taste for dissipation. However, their father might send them to you once or twice in the course of the winter. He brings them here on my birthday and on New Year's Day. On those days Monsieur Despard does me the favor of dining here with them. It is very singular behavior, said the judge with an air of conviction. Have you ever seen this Dame Jean Renaud? My brother-in-law one day, out of interest in his brother. Ah, monsieur is Monsieur Despard's brother? Said the lawyer, interrupting her. The chevalier bowed, but did not speak. Monsieur Despard, who has watched this affair, took me to the oratoire, where this woman goes to sermon, for she is a Protestant. I saw her. She is not in the least attractive. She looks like a butcher's wife, extremely fat, horribly marked with the smallpox. She has feet and hands like a man's. She squints. In short, she is monstrous. It is inconceivable, said the judge, looking like the most imbecile judge in the whole kingdom. And this creature lives near here, Rue Verte, in a fine house? There are no plain folk left, it would seem. In a mansion on which her son has spent absurd sums. Madame, said Popinot, I live in the Faubourg Saint-Marceau. I know nothing of such expenses. What do you call absurd sums? Well, said the Marquise, a stable with 5 horses and 3 carriages, a phaeton, a brougham, and a cabriolet. That costs a large sum, then? asked Popinot in surprise. Enormous sums, said Rastignac, intervening. Such an establishment would cost, for the stables, the keeping the carriages in order, and the liveries for the men, between 15,000 and 16,000 francs a year. Should you think so, madame? said the judge, looking much astonished. Yes, at least, replied the Marquise. And the furniture, too, must have cost a lot of money. More than 100,000 francs, replied Madame d'Espard, who could not help smiling at the lawyer's vulgarity. Judges, madame, are apt to be incredulous. It is what they are paid for, and I am incredulous. The Baron Jean Renaud and his mother must have fleeced Monsieur Despard most preposterously, if what you say is correct. There is a stable establishment which, by your account, costs 16,000 francs a year. Housekeeping, servants' wages, and the gross expenses of the house itself must run to twice as much. That makes a total of from 50 to 60,000 francs a year. Do you suppose that these people, formerly so extremely poor, can have so large a fortune? 1 million yields scarcely 40,000 a year. Monsieur, the mother and son invested the money given them by Monsieur d'Espard in the funds when they were at 60 to 80. I should think their income must be more than 60,000 francs. And then the son has fine appointments. If they spend 60,000 francs a year, said the judge, how much do you spend? Well, said Madame d'Espard, about the same. The Chevalier started a little. The Marquise coloured. Bianchon looked at Rastignac, but Popinot preserved an expression of simplicity which quite deceived Madame d'Espard. The Chevalier took no part in the conversation. He saw that all was lost. "These people, madame, might be indicted before the superior court," said Popinot. "That was my opinion," exclaimed the Marquise, enchanted. "If threatened with the police, they would have come to terms." "Madame," said Popinot, "when Monsieur d'Espard left you, did he not give you a power of attorney enabling you to manage and control your own affairs?" "I do not understand the object of all these questions," said the Marquise with petulance. "It seems to me that if you would only consider the state in which I am placed by my husband's insanity, you ought to be troubling yourself about him and not about me." "We are coming to that, madame," said the judge. "Before placing in your hands, or in any others, the control of Monsieur d'Espard's property, supposing he were pronounced incapable, the court must inquire as to how you have managed your own. If Monsieur d'Espard gave you the power, he would have shown confidence in you, and the court would recognize the fact. Had you any power from him? You might have bought or sold house property, or invested money in business." "No, monsieur, the Blamont-Chauvrys are not in the habit of trading," said she, extremely nettled in her pride as an aristocrat, and forgetting the business in hand. "My property is intact, and Monsieur d'Espard gave me no power to act." The Chevalier put his hand over his eyes not to betray the vexation he felt at his sister-in-law's short-sightedness, for she was ruining herself by her answers. Popinot had gone straight to the mark, in spite of his apparent doublings. "Madame," said the lawyer, indicating the Chevalier, "this gentleman, of course, is your near connection. May we speak openly before these other gentlemen?" "Speak on," said the Marquise, surprised at this caution. "Well, madame, granting that you spend only 60,000 francs a year, to anyone who sees your stables, your house, your train of servants, and a style of housekeeping which strikes me as far more luxurious than that of the Jeanbrunauds, that sum would seem well laid out." The Marquise bowed an agreement. "But," continued the judge, "if you have no more than 26,000 francs a year, you may have 100,000 francs of debt. The court would therefore have a right to imagine that the motives which prompt you to ask that your husband may be deprived of the control of his property are complicated by self-interest in the need of paying your debts, if you have any. The requests addressed to me have interested me in your position. Consider fully, and make your confession. If my suppositions have hit the truth, there is yet time to avoid the blame which the court would have a perfect right to express in the saving clauses of the verdict, if you could not show your attitude to be absolutely honorable and clear. It is our duty to examine the motives of the applicant, as well as to listen to the plea of the witness under examination, to ascertain whether the petitioner may not have been prompted by passion, by a desire for money, which is unfortunately too common. The Marquise was on St. Lawrence's gridiron. "And I must have explanations on this point. Madame, I have no wish to call you to account. I only want to know how you have managed to live at the rate of 60,000 francs a year, and that for some years past. There are plenty of women who achieve this in their housekeeping, but you are not one of those. Tell me, you may have the most legitimate resources, a royal pension, or some claim on the indemnities lately granted, but even then you must have had your husband's authority to receive them." The Marquise did not speak. "You must remember," Popinot went on, "that Monsieur d'Espard may wish to enter a protest, and his counsel will have a right to find out whether you have any creditors. This boudoir is newly furnished. Your rooms are not now furnished with the things left to you by Monsieur d'Espard in 1816. If, as you did me the honour of informing me, furniture is costly for the Jean Renauds, it must be yet more so for you, who are a great lady. Though I am a judge, I am but a man. I may be wrong. Tell me so. Remember the duties imposed on me by the law, and the rigorous inquiries it demands, when the case before it is the suspension from all his functions of the father of a family in the prime of life. So you will pardon me, Madame la Marquise, for laying all these difficulties before you. It will be easy for you to give me an explanation. When a man is pronounced incapable of the control of his own affairs, a trustee has to be appointed. Who will be the trustee?" "His brother," said the Marquise. The Chevalier bowed. There was a short silence, very uncomfortable for the 5 persons who were present. The judge, in sport, as it were, had laid open the woman's sore place. Popinot's countenance of common, clumsy good nature, at which the Marquise, the Chevalier, and Rastignac had been inclined to laugh, had gained importance in their eyes. As they stole a look at him, they discerned the various expressions of that eloquent mouth. The ridiculous mortal was a judge of acumen. His studious notice of the boudoir was accounted for. He had started from the gilt elephant supporting the chimney clock, examining all this luxury, and had ended by reading this woman's soul. "If the Marquis d'Espard is mad about China, I see that you are not less fond of its products," said Popinot, looking at the porcelain on the chimney-piece. "But perhaps it was from Monsieur le Marquis that you had these charming oriental pieces," and he pointed to some precious trifles. This irony, in very good taste, made Bianchon smile, and petrified Rastignac, while the Marquise bit her thin lips. "Instead of being the protector of a woman placed in a cruel dilemma, an alternative between losing her fortune and her children, and being regarded as her husband's enemy," she said, "you accuse me, monsieur. You suspect my motives. You must own that your conduct is strange." "Madame," said the judge eagerly, "the caution exercised by the court in such cases as these might have given you in any other judge a perhaps less indulgent critic than I am. And do you suppose that Monsieur d'Espard's lawyer will show you any great consideration? Will he not be suspicious of motives which may be perfectly pure and disinterested? Your life will be at his mercy. He will inquire into it without qualifying his search by the respectful deference I have for you." "I am very much obliged to you, monsieur," said the Marquise satirically. Admitting for the moment that I owe 30,000 or 50,000 francs, in the first place it would be a mere trifle to the d'Espards and the Blamont-Chauvrys. But if my husband is not in the possession of his mental faculties, would that prevent his being pronounced incapable? No, madame, said Popinot. Although you have questioned me with a sort of cunning which I should not have suspected in a judge, and under circumstances where straightforwardness would have answered your purpose, she went on, I will tell you without subterfuge that my position in the world, and the efforts I have to make to keep up my connection, are not in the least to my taste. I began my life by a long period of solitude, but my children's interest appealed to me. I felt that I must fill their father's place. By receiving my friends, by keeping up all this connection, by contracting these debts, I have secured their future welfare. I have prepared for them a brilliant career where they will find help and favor. And to have what has thus been acquired, many a man of business, lawyer or banker, would gladly pay all it has cost me. I appreciate your devoted conduct, madame, replied Popinot. It does you honor, and I blame you for nothing. A judge belongs to all. He must know and weigh every fact. Madame d'Espar's tact and practice in estimating men made her understand that Monsieur Popinot was not to be influenced by any consideration. She had counted on an ambitious lawyer. She had found a man of conscience. She at once thought of finding other means for securing the success of her side. The servants brought in tea. "Have you any further explanations to give me, madame?" said Popinot, seeing these preparations. "Monsieur," she replied haughtily, "do your business your own way. Question Monsieur d'Espard, and you will pity me, I am sure." She raised her head, looking Popinot in the face with pride mingled with impertinence. The worthy man bowed himself out respectfully. "A nice man is your uncle," said Rastignac to Bianchon. "Is he really so dense? Does he not know what the Marquise d'Espard is, what her influence means, her unavowed power over people? The keeper of the seals will be with her tomorrow." "My dear fellow, how can I help it?" said Bianchon. "Did not I warn you? He is not a man you can get over." "No," said Rastignac, "he is a man you must run over." The doctor was obliged to make his bow to the Marquise and her mute chevalier to catch up Popinot, who, not being the man to endure an embarrassing position, was pacing through the rooms. "That woman owes 100,000 crowns, said the judge as he stepped into his nephew's cab. "And what do you think of the case?" "I," said the judge, "I never have an opinion till I have gone into everything. Tomorrow early I will send to Madame Jean Renaud to call on me in my private office at 4 o'clock, to make her explain the facts which concern her, for she is compromised." "I should very much like to know what the end will be." "Why, bless me, do you not see that the Marquise is the tool of that tall, lean man who never uttered a word? There is a strain of Cain in him, but of the Cain who goes to the law courts for his bludgeon, and there, unluckily for him, we keep more than one Damocles' sword." "Oh, Rastignac, what brought you into that boat, I wonder?" exclaimed Bianchon. "Ah, we are used to seeing these little family conspiracies," said Popinot. "Not a year passes without a number of verdicts of insufficient evidence against applications of this kind. In our state of society, such an attempt brings no dishonor, while we send a poor devil to the galleys who breaks a pane of glass dividing him from a bowl full of gold. Our code is not faultless. But these are the facts. My boy, do you not know all the judicial romances with which clients impose on their attorneys? If the attorneys condemned themselves to state nothing but the truth, they would not earn enough to keep their office open. End of section 3.